Recently, over at the Japan Times, there was an interview done with the composer Joe Hisaishi, who's perhaps most famous for his work on the Studio Ghibli films, Princess Mononoke, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Spirited Away, and so on. This was posted by a fella by the name of Matt Schley. Joe Hisaishi goes over a few different topics in the interview, so if you're a fan of his, then definitely go check it out. And today I'd like to focus on his thoughts regarding online music streaming and its relevant artistic effects. To quote the man, "Let's say there's a musician who wants to use his music to say something about society, or play with the form, or show the way he sees the world through a collection of songs. With streaming, everything is focused on singles. That means an artist's depth doesn't have the chance to shine through. To compose means to add structure, not just to a song, but to a collection of songs. We composers and musicians have to really think about our approach in response to this." I feel someone has to defend the single here. It is unfair to casually diminish its creative potential. By the great songwriters of current and past generations, the substantial capability of the individual song has, in my opinion, been substantially demonstrated. I would almost feel silly trying to list off some of the beloved tunes of history. You know them already. Hey Jude, I Will Survive, Gangsta's Paradise, the goddamn YMCA, that awful John Lennon song Imagine, the Mariah Carey Christmas number, whose name I will not even say. If you're a competent writer and you find yourself in agreeable circumstances, the individual song has a tremendous potential for deep impact that should not be negated. Another obvious mention. Whether or not the streaming arena gives priority to short releases does not affect the dedicated artist's prerogative to use the longer forms. If a standard-length album is what is required by a musician to say what must be said, then they are still just as able to do so. In fact, given the wide-open exchange provided by the internet in general these days, this might be the best time to put work in on that new Symphony or song cycle or mega mixtape or what. And if it is true that the contemporary streaming system does prioritize the single, then this would only indicate a regression back to the dawn of recorded music over a century ago. The typical single, an individual recorded unit of just one or two songs, was the main product. So novel and brilliant was the new technology that the full-length albums we take for granted today were not required to excite the new customers. I say this not to just blindly appeal to history, but to encourage those who might have a retro fetish. It is mentioned elsewhere in the interview that a second symphony is one of Mr. Hisaishi's current works in progress, and I think this is an important little piece of circumstance. His placing of musical composition being within the scope of multiple songs, or at least structures beyond a single tune, this attitude seems to fit perfectly within the old romantic hierarchy where the symphony sat on top. The 74-minute four-movement behemoth used to be the chief format for a composer's genius, probably alongside the opera. A single is not a symphony, and I would never even joke about entertaining such a cheap idea. They do not say the same things, and they cannot say the same things. A symphony is an enormously broad work that is obviously capable of much more artistic transmission than even the most dense piece of songwriting. My attempts here are not to discredit or ridicule or snub the longer forms. The single song has weight to it. It takes care to assemble a good one, and it requires genius to make a great one. Creative types are well familiar with working around and through restrictions. So if the current landscape encourages a short attention span, then I would so encourage composers to explore that limited space and discover how to make their depth shine through. And thus, I have no complaint at all with Mr. Hisaishi's final note that musicians have to figure out how to deal with this new paradigm. That's the kind of productive spirit that should be impressed upon our artists. It demands us to continue thinking creatively and ultimately produce better music. If you have any thoughts on this, I'd be happy to read them in the comments, and thanks for watching.